this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 106 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Before we begin, I'd like to remind all members and witnesses in the room of the following important preventive measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, whereas the former earpieces were gray. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of a meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find affixed on your table. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted, as you can see, to increase the distance between microphones and to reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members as well as our distinguished witnesses. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. For members on Zoom, please do raise your hand function. The committee clerk and I will certainly do our best to maintain a consolidated speaking order. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning the connection test for witnesses, I am informed that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of our meeting. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee will commence consideration of the subject matter of Supplementary Estimate C 2023 to 2024, votes 1C, 5C, 10C, and 15C under the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Development. Pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, the committee will commence consideration of the main estimates 2024-2025, votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, and L30 under Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade, and Development, vote 1 under International Development Research Center, and vote 1 under International Joint Commission, referred to the committee on Thursday, February 29th, 2024. The chair calls vote 1. So I'd like to welcome before the members numerous individuals that we have here with us today. First and foremost, it is a great honor to have the Honorable Minister of International Development, Minister Hassan, here with us today. Thank you so much for being with us. The Minister is joined by officials. The officials who are accompanying the Minister are Christopher McClellan, the Deputy Minister of International Development. We have Alexander Levesque, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Europe, Arctic, Middle East, and Maghreb. We have Peter McDougall, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Global Issues and Development. We have Cheryl Urban, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister, Sub-Saharan Africa Branch. And also we have Ms. Shirley Carruthers, the Chief Financial Officer. Minister, you will be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks. If you could kindly look over every once in a while. When you see this, that means you should be wrapping it up in about 10 to 15 seconds. Thank you for being with us, Minister. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Today I'm here to discuss Canada's role in providing international assistance to advance sustainable development around the world. It is, of course, critical that we do so in a way that keeps in mind the current global context, the results that Canada has achieved over the past year, and examining the challenges ahead. It is no secret that global development landscape is changing rapidly. We've seen the devastating impacts of the Israel-Hamas war, the violence and instability in Haiti, the brutal conflict in Sudan, and the ongoing destruction by Russia in Ukraine. We've also seen how climate change is disproportionately affecting underdeveloped countries, with flooding in Pakistan, hurricanes in Honduras, and drought in Somalia. Canada is also operating in a context of weakened democracies worldwide and growing authoritarianism. In particular, we're seeing a global backlash against gender equality. We're seeing a rollback of hard-won human rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, and this is very disturbing. In this context, Canada is steadfast in its commitment to advance gender equality and deliver a feminist approach to international assistance in pursuit of a more prosperous, safe, and equitable world for all of us. Allow me to share some results from just this last year. In 2023, Canada's official development assistance increased by approximately 7% to $10.9 billion, resulting in Canada's highest official development assistance by gross national income level since 1995. And as part of these investments, we're delivering on global climate change commitments that we've made as a country. We continue to work with partners to promote clean energy, phase out coal, invest in climate resilient and smart agriculture, support environmental adaptation initiatives for the most vulnerable countries, and absolutely protect biodiversity. Through Canada's support for the Global Environment Facility, we're helping more than 8 million people adapt to climate change and protect 100 million hectares of marine biodiversity. We're also among the top donors supporting gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls through the Women's Voice and Leadership Program, being one example. We've supported over 1,100 women's rights organizations, feminist movements, and LGBTQI plus organizations in more than 30 developing countries. We're delivering on our 10-year, $1.4 billion annual commitment to advance the health and rights of women and girls around the world. From Peru to Bolivia to Zambia and Mozambique, I've seen the transformative impact of Canada's international assistance programming. And I've heard directly from young men and women, from community leaders and from others on how our supports are literally changing lives and changing systems. Other examples of how our aid is saving lives include Canada's contribution of over $930 million over 3 years to the Global Fund, which is fighting to end AIDS, TB, and malaria, and has so far saved over 44 million lives. Yet, despite this progress, the past year has been very challenging, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge this, Mr. Chair. Le coût humain des conflits augmente.
The human cost of conflicts is increasing. According to recent UN estimates, over 300 million people around the world will need humanitarian assistance and protection in 2024. Canada provided $1.3 billion in humanitarian assistance in fiscal year 2022-2023 to respond to the life-saving needs of those affected by conflict and natural disasters around the world. Of that amount, Canada provided $100 million to respond to the needs of vulnerable citizens in Gaza and in neighboring countries.
2024, we're investing an additional $350 million to respond to humanitarian crisis around the world because the need is greater than ever before. Now let's turn to the challenges that lie ahead of us. We know that development assistance alone is not enough to meet the growing needs of developing countries. So we need to continue to work with other countries, with development partners, with multilateral development banks, financial institutions, and the private sector to mobilize all the possible resources to enable development finance to support the progress towards sustainable development goals. Through the Grants and Contributions Transformation Initiative, Global Affairs Canada is finding new ways of working that are faster, more transparent, and more flexible. We need to continue to play a leadership role in shaping the international development landscape of the future. But, it's in recognition of the fact that Canada and Canadians do not live in a bubble. What happens around the world affects us right here at home, and investing in international assistance to contribute to global peace and security and inclusive economic growth helps us build a more peaceful and prosperous world for all of us. So with that, I want to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now proceed with questions from the members. And as I understand it, MP Chong, you're first. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in the statistical report on international assistance for the fiscal year 2022, 2023, the Government of Canada provided $730,000 in international assistance to Iran. Can you tell us what that was for?
Because of the detailed nature of the question, I'll turn to my officials for that particular project.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. When we do the report every single year, what it includes is 2 types of spendings. So it includes the spending that goes to multilateral organizations, such as the United Nations agencies, the Global Fund, for example. It also includes our bilateral assistance directly to countries. Usually it's not to the country itself, but it's rather through organizations that do development assistance work on the ground. Any country that is eligible for official development assistance, as dictated by the OECD, will receive funding through these multilateral organizations.
I don't have a lot of time, and we're already almost a quarter of the way through my time. So do you know what $730,000
what it is an
transferred
imputed percentage from Canada's contributions to multilateral organizations that have undertaken work in Iran.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Minister, we don't agree with the resumption of funding for UNRWA. The government announced a suspension of funding at the end of January, I think January 26th, and then reinstated it on March 8th. Were there any planned transfers during that roughly 5-week period? So what actually were we suspending during that 5-week period?
We, as I said at the time in my numerous statements, we paused additional funding to UNRWA pending the examination of the allegations that came forward. And
was there any scheduled funding during that period that was suspended? Or?
We paused any additional funding to UNRWA. Yeah, I can't be more clear than that, sir.
Okay. Funding's been announced, the government announced on March 8th that funding would be reinstated. And I believe it's $25 million of the $100 million commitment that is to be transferred to UNRWA this fiscal year. Is that correct?
Can you rephrase your question? Because I don't know what you're asking me. Are you asking me if we have unpaused funding to UNRWA?
No. Or my question is $25 million is supposed to be transferred to UNRWA. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Has that money been already transferred to UNRWA?
Yes, it has.
Okay. And were any conditions put on the transfer of that funding?
So I want to address your question by going back to the relationship between Canada and UNRWA. It's a recognition of UNRWA's role in Gaza as well as in the region. UNRWA is responsible for the humanitarian response to 2 million Gazans and 4 million Palestinians in the region. We unpaused funding in recognition of 2 things. One, the tangible and numerous steps that UNRWA itself and the UN took to build confidence and put more oversight and accountability measures that built the confidence of donor countries like Canada. And second, we also unpaused funding in recognition of the dire humanitarian situation on the ground. When you combine those 2 things, we were confident to move forward. The responsibility of UNRWA to continue to implement those oversight mechanisms and accountability mechanisms and to meet its obligations towards neutrality and anti-terrorism are ongoing. They're not just stuck in that time. So we will continue to monitor that. But we're very confident at the number of significant steps taken both by UNRWA the UN, and the Secretary General personally.
The UN Kelowna report made 50 recommendations, some of which were to allow UN bodies such as UNHCR and the World Food Program direct access to Gaza to address the humanitarian crisis there without having to go through UNRWA. Were those the kinds of, have you put those kinds of conditions tied to those recommendations in the report on the transfer of the $25 million? And if not, are you prepared to put conditions on the remaining $75 million that is yet to be transferred?
So, number one, the World Food Program is already in Gaza.
Yes, but the report's criticism, the UN report's criticism of how the World Food Program is operating in Gaza is that it's not operating under its own auspices there, but rather has to operate under under UNRWA, under UNRWA, rather than under the World Food Program. And so their recommendation was that UN agencies be able to go directly into Gaza without having to seek intercession through UNRWA. And so my question is, have you put conditions like that on the transfer of funding to UNRWA? And if not, are you willing to do that in the future?
You characterize that as intercession. What I would say is that we recognize UNRWA being the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. That's not just the Canadian position, it's the position of many, many international trusted partners who deliver aid to Gaza. They rely on UNRWA to use their logistics, to use their networks to distribute that aid. And that's it. That's, for example, that's what the World Food Program does.
Thank you. We now go to MP Zuberi. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here and for the amazing work of your team in promoting international development and Canada's presence on the international stage. My first question is going to be around the Humanitarian Coalition. And there are a number of amazing humanitarian groups in Canada that do very important work. The Humanitarian Coalition is composed of respected humanitarian organizations. There are many others also, some others, that are not currently in this coalition. Can you elaborate on any criteria that allow those others who aren't inside to enter? Is there any, can you elaborate upon that and give us some understanding?
Thank you so much for that question. I would begin just by saying that on the impact of the crisis in Gaza, the war between Israel and Hamas, we've been very concerned from the very beginning on the impact that it's had and continues to have on Palestinian civilians. And our commitment to providing life-saving humanitarian aid has been very strong from the very beginning. We were the first Western country to respond with an initial allocation of $60 million. We followed that up with an additional $40 million. And that, again, is the recognition that we should be guided by the principle of making sure that Canada continues to provide life-saving assistance to anyone in the region that needs it, to the point of even embarking on airdrops when it was difficult to reach northern Gaza and joining allies in doing that. On the mechanics of who gets to join the Humanitarian Coalition, again, I'm going to turn to Deputy McClellan to provide detail on that.
Just briefly, please.
Yeah, I mean, the Humanitarian Coalition is not a Canadian government organization. It's a grouping of Canadian humanitarian organizations, and so they have their own set of criteria as to who can join and who has decided not to join for various reasons. So it's really up to the coalition itself.
That's only raise it because of matching funds that have been given to the coalition, and groups sometimes outside the coalition ask for matching funds. I hope that you into the future will consider those requests. I'm sure you do already, but just on that particular point. You actually, Minister, you started to touch upon a point that I wanted to elaborate upon, and you have spoken to this already, in part around UNRWA, around what's happening, the nightmare that we are seeing occur within Gaza, and the humanitarian crisis that is occurring there, which our allies, including America, have highlighted and pinpointed that much more humanitarian aid needs to get, unimpeded humanitarian aid needs to get into Gaza. Our allies, including America, have stated as such. Can you, number one, tell us why UNRWA is so important for the delivery of that aid? Two, can you tell us anything in addition to that you'd like to share in terms of Canada's record with respect to stepping in during this crisis, this nightmare?
Thank you. So I've been to Rafah, and I've seen firsthand the number of trucks that are stuck at the border. Thousands and thousands of trucks, at least 2,000 when I was there, who have been at the border for more than 21 days. That aid needs to get through, and the process that is now in place, or at least was in place at that time, was just too cumbersome and time-consuming. There've been improvements lately with the opening of the Eretz border crossing, which has allowed Jordan to cut through the West Bank and deliver aid to northern Gaza, which is a priority for all of us because northern Gaza has famine-like conditions, according to the head of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain. So the fact of the matter is international humanitarian law calls for the unimpeded access of both the aid as well as the humanitarian workers, and that's been the Canadian position. We've worked with our partners to make sure that we're there to not only provide the aid, but ensure that we're doing everything that we can to have the aid go in, including pursuing airdrops, because for the northern Gaza population, the trucks were not able to make it there for various reasons, and so we embarked on airdrops together with many like-minded countries, and we'll continue to do that. Look, I think that the amount of aid and the conditions in which humanitarian workers have to operate inside Gaza is not optimal. It is far from acceptable, and based on our monitoring of the situation, we continue to call for better access, unimpeded access for both the aid as well as the workers.
In the minute that's left, I'd like to ask you about Sudan and the important work you have done with your team to step in during this humanitarian crisis also in Sudan, where there have been 15,000 who have died since the civil war that started in April 2023, that is. If you want to elaborate, please.
Yeah. So the conflict in Sudan is very concerning because it's led to one of the most, in terms of absolute numbers, one of the highest populations of displaced people in the world today, both within Sudan, which is a very large country, but also in the region. And so our job is to make sure that, first of all, that we are contributing to efforts to end the conflict through working with partners. I was able to meet with the last civilian Sudanese prime minister who has a connection to Canada and who's working very hard to make sure that there's a return to democracy in Sudan and an end to the conflict. But we are providing aid, $132 million to trusted partners in Sudan and in neighboring countries to make sure that people, again, have the life-saving assistance that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here today. It's the first time since your nomination last summer that you've appeared before this committee. I was at the Assemblée Nationale on the government and the opposition side, so I'm always very surprised to see the extent to which ministers participate very little in committee work here in Ottawa. But we're very pleased that you're here today to speak with us on the main estimates of the department having to do with development aid. I would also like to indicate that the Bloc Québécois did not agree with the decision made by the Canadian government to suspend funding to UNRWA, and we were relieved when the decision was made to reestablish this funding. It seemed to be the thing to do. Gaza is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises of the last century, and it was not the time to suspend Canadian humanitarian aid. According to a UN press release, Israel has not yet provided proof with regards to the allegations saying that a number of UNRWA would be members of terrorist organizations. So it was very important to reinstate funding to this organization that is probably the best positioned to bring forth assistance to Palestinians experiencing aggression on their territory, and evoking the fact that we would disagree with funding of UNRWA seems to be quite insensitive, amazingly insensitive given what's happening right now in Gaza. And with regards to the concerning poor picture that you've spoken about with regards to humanitarian assistance, and in light of your observations, what could be done in order to improve the situation so that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza so that the famine announced by the United Nations will not happen? With regards to the escalation of the crisis in Gaza, we are funding UNRWA once again, according to our commitment, to assist Gazans who are experiencing restrictions and food shortages and shortage of access to health.
Gazans, and when it comes to their infrastructure and their networks of being able to distribute the aid very quickly, they're second to none. What can we do more? We need to, of course, continue to support UNRWA in their efforts to provide, more support to Palestinians in Gaza, but also work with other organizations like the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and many, many other, including Canadian organizations who are on the ground in Gaza, providing that life-saving assistance. But access is also an issue. We need to continue to advocate for access, continue to innovate and use other methods when people are in severe need and that the regular methods are not working, and that's why we pursued airdrops together with the Jordanians and the Germans and the Dutch and others, and through the World Food Program, for example. And we need a ceasefire. We need the conflict to end so that it would be much easier in that environment for environmental work, for humanitarian workers to work in a less dangerous environment. So we need a ceasefire. We need the conflict to end. And ultimately, our government's position is that we need a two-state solution so that we have two states or two people living side by side in peace and security.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. This committee is currently studying the entire issue around the presence or the Canadian action in Africa. This is an issue that should be looked at under the angle of the francophonie and international trade, and I imagine that you're giving it a specific attention with regards to international development and even at global affairs. We don't really know under what angle we should be looking at it. In the beginning, we were talking about an African approach, an African strategy, an African framework or policy, and now we don't even know how to call it. And we have the impression that the government is navigating a bit blindly with regards to Africa. We see that Canada has reached some free trade agreements throughout the world, but none on the African continent, although Africa is being identified as being the next economic El Dorado of the world. So I'd like to know, with these estimates, I'd like to know what portion is specifically allocated to Africa, and is there an overall vision with regards to international development specifically for Africa, or not?
See,
If you could respond within 15 seconds.
15 seconds, okay. I would just say that, look, we need to broaden and deepen our engagement with Africa on trade, investment, economic cooperation, and international assistance, and make Africa a foreign policy priority. But we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from a good place, and already our international assistance policy commits 50% of all bilateral international development assistance to sub-Saharan African countries.
Thank you very much, Minister. We next go to Ms. McPherson, who's joining us virtually. The floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, Madam McPherson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today to answer our questions. I have a number, so I'll just jump right in. As you know, because I've raised it with you a number of times, I believe that the Canadian small and medium organizations in Canada do incredible work, really incredible work, run through the Intercouncil network of provincial and regional councils. They are able to reach Canadians across the country. They're able to do innovative, long-term, very good development work on the ground. And there has been some concerns that there has been underfunding for the small and medium organizations across the country. I'd like to get some information from you on whether or not the pilot initiative will be continued and if there is funding allocated in these main estimates to the Canadian small and medium organizations for Impact and Innovation Pilot Initiative. And if there is funds allocated, can you please tell me how much?
Mr. Chair, thank you so much to the member for the question. I will start by making a brief remark on this and then turning to the officials on the specific amount. But what I would say very clearly to all the members and the chair in this committee is that I agree with the member. We need to encourage more Canadian-based organizations, small, medium, and large organizations, to feel welcome in our programming, in our funding envelopes and our projects, and to leverage their expertise, their credibility, and their knowledge of international development. They do great work. So I agree with the member. We need to do more. But as the officials will highlight, we're already making progress. So I'll turn to my deputy to provide further detail.
And if those answers could be quite concise, because I do have some other questions, please.
Sure, I'll be very concise. I mean, we don't have a specific allotments directly from this year's budget. Not because there's not going to be money that flows that way. It just doesn't align directly with the main estimates in that way. But it is a part of the programming. We have 39 SMOs right now that have received funding, and that funding is ongoing. And 50 SMOs have been selected to test innovative solutions using the Fund for Innovation and Transformation. And that will be on.
Thank you. And if you could share any details about the
Sure.
dollar amounts that will be going out when that becomes available, that would be helpful.
Sure.
You know, we're talking about small and medium organizations here, Minister, and one of the concerns that I have, and I've expressed to you many times, is around Bill C-41. So, you know, a year ago, your government pushed through Bill C-41. It significantly changed the way that Canadians can do international development work. We were happy the NDP was successful in amending the legislation to ensure that humanitarian work was exempted from the new authorization regime, but development work, so the work that you're responsible, is still within that C-41. We're over a year in. There is no guidance for Canadian organizations on how to navigate this regime and apply for authorizations from the government. We know that there are situations in Sudan, the DRC, around the world where this is going to have impacts. So I have two questions for you. How much development funding for Afghanistan, not humanitarian funding, but development funding, has reached Afghanistan since Bill C-41 passed? And when will Canadian organizations see the guidance from your government that can help them navigate what is a completely inappropriate draconian authorization regime?
So the second question first, and then I'll turn to the officials for the specific amounts. But there's no doubt that any delays on such important development work is frustrating for all of us. Public safety is leading this effort, and we're working very closely with them to make the authorization regime operational as soon as possible on the development side of things. And we're hopeful that this will launch in the coming months.
So to be perfectly honest, just to interrupt before I get the answer to the first question, there was supposed to be a review after 1 year. That's in the legislation. That's impossible to do because you haven't actually given organizations any of the framework on how to actually apply for these authorizations. So you're in contradiction of the legislation that is supposed to be doing a review. But I will go to your colleagues on the amount that has flowed to Afghanistan since C-41 passed.
On that specific question, we'd have to get back to you in writing in terms of the amount since the time of the passing of the legislation to today in terms of the exact amount on development assistance.
Could you tell me if any has gone?
Yes, but I don't know what the amount is exactly off the top of my head.
Thank you. So my next question that I have for you, Minister, is around Gaza. So we know that last week the United Nations reported that it would take until 2040 to restore the homes devastated in Israel's bombing and ground offensive in Gaza. And that's if the conflict ended today. We are seeing a crime of domicide. The world hasn't seen anything like the unprecedented destruction of housing in Gaza since World War II. We also know that with the unexploded ordinances and environmental destruction, that the land in Gaza is now a significant hazard for rebuilding. In fact, scientists have said that the planet warming emissions generated during just the first 2 months of the war in Gaza were greater than the annual carbon footprint of more than 20 of the world's most climate vulnerable nations. So I asked the government months ago about the plan for the reconstruction of Gaza. And I really want to get an answer. What is the plan for the government? Will you clearly state now that Canada will not accept any solution that denies the right of Gazans to return to their land? And what plans have you made for increasing Canadian assistance to help fund the rebuilding of Gaza for Gazans when this war is over? Because there is a very deep concern that as we rebuild Ukraine, as we rebuild Gaza, as we rebuild Sudan, that the people around the world will suffer if the money going to that rebuilding is coming off their backs, and the people that are living in these communities need support to rebuild their communities.
We're already 20 seconds over, so if you could respond as briefly as possible, Minister.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that'll be a challenge because the member has asked like 4 questions in one, so I don't know which one to start with. But all to say is that we've been there for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and we'll be there in the future. And of course, we are advocating for a ceasefire so that we can actually allow more aid to go in and have unimpeded access for humanitarian workers.
Thank you. Now, as the members will notice, the bells are ringing. Do we have, yes, Mr. Chong?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe if you seek it, hopefully you will find it, that we continue to sit until the bells have expired and the question is put, that we then suspend to allow members to vote, and that we then come out of suspension once the Speaker has declared the result of the vote.
Unanimous consent to that? Yeah? Yes.
My
Ms.
voting
Van
app is acting up right now. If I could go 5 minutes before, just in case it doesn't work.
Mr. Chair, I'll reframe the unanimous consent question that the chair suspend 5 minutes before the bells have expired, that the committee remain suspended until the Speaker has declared the results of the vote, and that the committee come out of suspension at that point in time. And I believe it. If you seek it, you will find it.
Nodding. Excellent. Thank you very much. So now we will go to the second round of questions. And we start off with MP Abultaif. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister, to committee. Minister, you've paused the assistance or aid to UNRWA for about 6 weeks. Is that correct?
Yes, roughly, yes.
Okay.
That's accurate.
So what that mean technically? So you've announced that you're pausing the flowing of money or assistance, and what happened in that case?
As Mr. Chair, to the honourable member, as I indicated earlier in my question to your colleague, we, together with other donor countries as well as the Secretary General of the United Nations, looked at this issue. We demanded and asked for accountability measures, enhanced oversight measures, and tangible steps to be taken to address issues around neutrality and other issues. And I must say, in that time period, the UN Secretary General, the UN system, as well as UNRWA itself, took a number of tangible steps to address our concerns, but also to implement and institute oversight measures, additional accountability measures. And some of those are ongoing. Some of them have been completed, but some are ongoing, and we expect that work to continue. And based on those actions, we lifted the pause on additional funding to UNRWA.
So there was a gap because you stopped the flow of funds, but people still need that assistance on the ground.
Oh,
how did you manage to allocate the money? Or
we in that time period, we also provided additional support to the tune of $40 million to other international trusted partners that were also active in Gaza, including the World Food Program, UNICEF, World Health Organization, and others. I want to just sort of challenge an underlying assumption that you're making in your question, which is that it was either UNRWA or the others. That wasn't the case. Even before the pause, in the first $60 million of assistance that Canada announced in response to the crisis in Gaza, it was, some of it went to UNRWA, but most of it actually went to many other organizations, including the Humanitarian Coalition. So our response has always been UNRWA and other organizations.
But just on record,
not one or the other.
I'm trying to clarify the fact, and I'm trying to clarify the mechanism.
Yeah.
It's very important for all of us to understand that. And I think now, is there any specific program that you don't support among UNRWA's programs or work? Is there any specific program you do not support?
I mean, I don't understand the question. Are you saying, is there, do we oppose UNRWA's work? Is that what you're asking me? Because I don't.
The question is,
UNRWA provides life-saving support for Palestinians,
True.
which, by the way, is something that I've never heard from your party and all your members talk about. In all this time, I haven't seen a single member of that caucus get up to talk about the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
But again,
So
Minister,
you can question.
Please, let me finish. I think the question is, the premise of the question is this, that I'm saying UNRWA has several programs that they do, some of the food, some of the education, some. Okay. Is there any specific program that Canadian money does not support among what UNRWA do, or we support everything they do? That's the question.
We support the work of UNRWA to provide life-saving assistance to Palestinian civilians. That's what we do.
True. But is there any specific programs that you say, I won't support this specific program?
Mr. Chair, I don't understand the nature of the question. We provide funding to UNRWA to provide support to Palestinian civilians. And that includes delivering humanitarian support as well as education and other services.
But for us to understand how the money is going to be distributed, it's just a normal question, as I said earlier. I mean, there's certain areas that UNRWA do a lot of work for so many years. We understand that.
Yes.
And I've lived through it somehow in the past. There's no surprise.
Right.
I'm asking the technical question about how, if there's any programs that you'd support more that UNRWA does that compared to others that you don't.
So now you're talking about the proportion. Which one is more, which one is less? I'll turn to the officials for that. All I know is that UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, and we support them for doing that work. And they have an extensive history and network. And, you know, who delivered what truck and when, I can't answer that. That's too granular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We next go to Madame Chatel. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for appearing here before the committee. I would like to continue with regards to the situation in Gaza. The director of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain, said that Gaza is now in a total situation of famine. So it's quite amazing that we have reached this point. It's catastrophic to hear my conservative colleagues say that we need to stop funding UNRWA. Well, I think that this would mean hundreds of thousands of deaths immediately. My question is the following. How can we help more? How can the funding and this aid, how can it bring aid immediately? And how can we avoid this catastrophic humanitarian crisis?
Thank you so much to the member, Mr. Chair. The member brings up a really important point that what we're talking about is life-saving assistance. Literally, hundreds of thousands of people are on the verge of famine. In fact, recently, as the member indicated, the head of the World Food Program, Cindy McCain, said that in northern Gaza, at least, there's a full-blown famine. And this is something that a number of respected human rights organizations and humanitarian organizations, I should say, have been warning about for months. And it is why we have been calling for unimpeded humanitarian access. It is why Canada, together with like-minded countries, have embarked on the extraordinary effort of launching airdrops, because northern Gaza was not accessible to trucks and to aid workers. So we had to resort to that to do everything that we can, because that's what international humanitarian law calls on countries to do everything that we can to prevent humanitarian assistance from being prevented from reaching people. We have to make sure that people have access to life-saving assistance.
Merci beaucoup. Une autre catastrophe, c'est...
Thank you. Another disaster is the situation in Haiti. I see that you have the votes here in the supplementary budget. Could you explain to us how humanitarian assistance to Haiti will be able to support Haitians during this crisis? Also, it's an unprecedented crisis there.
Nous sommes profondément.
We are deeply concerned by what is happening in Haiti and by the impact on civilians and innocent civilians. We continue to support the Haitian-directed solution facing this crisis. Canada has always supported development in Haiti, including towards $140 million in funding in 2023 for international aid. So close to 14 million in humanitarian aid. One last question. Before the committee, we heard people who came to speak about the climate crisis and the impact that this has on populations in developing countries. It's very concerning. They also talk about climate refugees. I know that the supplementary estimates speak of the international program for climate. Could you explain to us how it will help?
Another really important question on the issue of climate change, the impacts of climate change, the impacts of biodiversity loss, the impacts of plastic pollution. We can simply not do it alone. We need to collaborate with others. We need to work with others to tackle these challenges head on. And Canada is doing its part through our Feminist International Assistance Policy. We're contributing to climate adaptation measures by providing resources to developing countries to implement climate adaptation measures, to implement through our Global Environment Facility. We've contributed to efforts to fight biodiversity loss, to fight plastic pollution. All of these things are beneficial to Canada as well, because if that plastic is not tackled at the source, it will wash up to Canada. Biodiversity loss, we all rely on biodiversity for our medication and other benefits. And we're working with like-minded countries and communities around the world to tackle these issues at the front lines.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, and thank you once again, Mr. Minister, for being here. I have 2 quick questions, and my first one in the supplementary estimates, in follow-up to the question asked by my colleague, Mrs. Chatel, we learned that an investment of $28.6 million was there. We see for 2024-2025, the funding will end in 2024. How much was invested up until now, and why did we not increase this funding?
Question, Mr. Chair.
Missed the first part, yeah.
Haïti.
I don't have that. I don't have the exact number that we've invested up to
Pouvez-vous
that.
nous revenir avec
Could you come back with an answer at a later date? Thank you. And my other question, we know that 2 years ago, Canada had participated in the fund against malaria, AIDS, and other diseases, and we believe that there would be an increase to this funding. Another thing for the elimination of polio. So are we going to increase funding, the World Fund for these eradication of these diseases and the eradication of polio?
Mr. Chair, I'll again turn to the officials for the specific numbers.
Mais si j'ai bien compris la question, ça parle.
So we're talking about the next reconstitution of funds. Each time, this comes up every year, and the Government of Canada, for several years now, has always been contributing with regards to our support to both of these initiatives. So I'm understanding that we can expect that this time, once again, we will contribute. Yes, absolutely. But as I was saying, we need to wait in both cases for it says stay tuned by the organizations. Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Madam McPherson. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on one of the questions I asked that the officials answered with regards to C-41. If that clarification on the funds that have been sent to Afghanistan since C-41 was put into practice, could you please clarify when you submit that back to the committee whether those organizations are Canadian or whether those organizations are multilateral organizations? Thank you. And then I would also go back to the minister. I know I threw a lot at you, Minister, right before I ran out of time, but I would like to ask again, can you please state that a Liberal government would not accept any solution to rebuilding Gaza that denies the right of Gazans to return to their land?
So on the issue of the Palestinians, particularly, I think you're referring to the possible displacement of people from Rafah. Our position on that is very clear. We oppose any military action against innocent civilians in Rafah because they have nowhere else to go, and therefore they're staying and seeking refuge in Rafah, and we've made that very clear. So
that's not the question. I'm asking about when there comes a time when this conflict is over, hopefully soon, because there's such incredible loss of life. But when this conflict is over and there is rebuilding of Gaza, does the Canadian government commit that no rebuilding of Gaza will happen unless the right of Gazans to return to their homeland is clear?
Is that I'm just not sure what you're referring to in terms of. I mean, do you have information to inform me whether Palestinians have been denied their right to return to Gaza? I'm not sure what you're referring to,
yes,
Ms. McPherson.
There's a long history of Palestinians not being able to return to their homeland.
And
there is a very big risk that if there is not concrete steps taken by the international community in this circumstance, that same failure to allow Gazans to return could happen again. And I would not want Canada to be involved in helping to rebuild Gaza and help build a part of Palestine if Gazans were not given the absolute clear right to return to their homelands.
Minister, 9 seconds remaining.
Okay. Look, we support a ceasefire and we support the right of Palestinian civilians to live in peace in Gaza, and we oppose military action in Rafah.
Thank you. So for the last two questions, 2 minutes each. We first go to Mr. Jenis. You have 2 minutes.
I am deeply concerned about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and in Afghanistan, as I've said many times. Both of these territories are controlled by recognized terrorist organizations. Canadian organizations cannot operate in these places without authorization. That was the problem that Bill C-41 was supposed to solve. It was supposed to provide a framework whereby organizations could provide support in terrorist-controlled areas. Now, we heard last spring when we studied this bill at the Justice Committee about the great urgency of the matter to avoid another winter in the case of Afghanistan. Minister, it's been a full year. No organization has given authorization because there's been no framework whatsoever to give them authorization. In my view, given the urgency of this, given what we were told a year ago the urgency was, this is utterly disgraceful, and this affects many of the humanitarian contexts that we're talking about. Is this an issue of government incompetence that we've delayed a year, or is it simply a matter of you or your officials not actually believing in the framework of the bill in the first place?
So I will avoid the hyperbole of the member and stick to
Yeah, many people are dying, and I've only been given 2 minutes. So you have 30 seconds. Could you provide an answer?
I'm not going to resort in that hyperbole if you let me answer. I'll give you the answer that I provided.
Please. I want to know. What's the answer?
That I provided earlier, which is that this is an important matter. The delays are frustrating for all of us, and I understand where you're coming from. Public safety is leading this effort. We're working with them. I hope we can arrive at a solution very soon in the coming months, and that we operationalize this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Minister, that's not good enough. And if I seem frustrated, it's because I am, and I'm trying to reflect the urgency and frustration of the vast number of people who have families in Gaza, in Afghanistan, and other places that are controlled by terrorist organizations. I want one more question I want to get in. I sent you a letter along with other members.
You have 9 seconds.
Well, I'll get it in. I sent you a letter on Burma. It took you 6 months to respond, and you didn't answer the core question. Why are you providing aid through government-controlled areas instead of opposition-controlled areas in Burma? It took you 6 months to respond, and you didn't even answer that basic question. Why not through opposition-controlled areas?
Very briefly, Minister.
It's very rich that the honourable member is trying to give me a hard time for aid to Burma when his leader would cut all international aid. Maybe you should advocate.
That is complete nonsense. Can you answer the question and take your job seriously?
Mr. Jenis, as I've indicated to you, you're out of time. Thank you.
Can you answer the question, Minister?
Mr. Jenis, you're out of time. Mr. Jenis.
Yeah, but just on a point of order, Chair. Can I have a point of order then?
On several occasions, you're out of time.
Yeah, I have a point of order, Chair.
You are.
Yeah, I have a point of order. Chair, witnesses at parliamentary committees have an obligation to answer questions. That applies to ministers as well as to members of the public. And I asked a very direct question, and I'd like you to put to the minister that he has an obligation to provide a simple answer to a simple question.
Mr. Jenis, I understand that the minister did respond to your question.
You know, it is
a point of order, Mr. Chair. This is a false point of order. This is a figment.
Mr.
He brought Christian Firth before the bar for the same reason, because he wouldn't answer questions that were put to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for being here today. This is perhaps a good segue to ask you this question, because there are a lot of posturing, and Canadians are understandably asking, what is the value of Canada's aid to people in need around the world? Why is it important that Canada plays a role around the world when people are in need? So I'll give you these 2 minutes to explain why Canadians should be proud of Canada's role.
Right, a point that's lost on the leader of the official opposition and the honourable member. We need to.
Partisan fights. This is silliness. You're a minister of the Crown. Take your job seriously.
If he could refrain from interrupting.
I think I know my job better than you, sir. Yes, I do.
C-41.
Yes, I do.
Could you refrain from interrupting?
Yes, I do. And I wish you brought the same level of advocacy to international development to your leader who wants to cut international development assistance in total. International assistance and development is important for Canada, and it is important because when we live in partnership with the rest of the world, and what happens in many parts of the world affects us, whether it's the loss of biodiversity, as I indicated earlier, whether it is the deterioration of peace and security, instability, and the proliferation of plastics, and the lack of respect for human rights. All of those things impact us right here, and it is in absolutely Canada's national interest to contribute to peace, security, and development around the world, because we're a trading nation and we thrive on access and engagement with the rest of the world and not withdrawing from the rest of the world.
Thank you, Minister. We now have 3.5 minutes before the vote. And as I understand it, the Minister could only stay with us till 4:30. I will now suspend, and we will resume as soon as the votes are counted. We will resume. So that should be in approximately 15 minutes or maybe 17 minutes from now. Thank you very much, Minister. Meeting stands suspended. resume the meeting on estimates. Once again, I just wanted to thank the witnesses who are appearing before us for the benefit of the members. I will once again identify all the officials who are here to answer our questions. We're grateful to have here with us Mr. Christopher McLennan, the Deputy Minister for International Development, Mr. Alexandre Levesque, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Europe, Arctic, Middle East, and Maghreb. We have Mr. Peter McDougall, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Global Issues and Development. We have Ms. Cheryl Urban, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Sub-Saharan Africa Branch. And we have Ms. Shirley Caruthers, the Chief Financial Officer. So thank you all for being with us today. We will now resume the questions by the members, and the first member up is MP Epp. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. When the Minister outlined in his opening comments the many different projects that are funded through your department, what would be the average number or the range of number of sign-offs that it takes to flow a project through a Canadian CSO or an NGO?
To be perfectly honest, I don't know what the average number of sign-offs are. It would be numerous sign-offs depending upon all the key elements that are required in putting together a contribution agreement for a Canadian organization.
I wonder if you could table some background information on that with the committee.
Sure.
I'll tell you why. In conversations with CSOs, I'm told it takes up to 19. And the reason why I raise this is that, the Senate produced a report on diplomacy. Now, granted, it was more targeted toward the Foreign Service, which isn't exactly this department. But the criticism I hear of the DFID, of the international development regime, is that through past cost-cutting exercises, the bottom has been trimmed and not so much the top. And so I understand there are some efforts being made to address that. Can you speak to those?
Maybe I'll speak along two lines. So the first one, in kind of response to your direct question, it's been pretty clear for a number of years that particularly our Canadian partners, but quite honestly, even large multilateral partners have found the Government of Canada a very difficult partner to work through because of the thickness of our processes and the timelines that are often required to undertake the many components of putting together a contribution or a grant arrangement. The government takes this very seriously, and we are and have embarked on a rather serious process that is also encompasses, and the Minister did mention it, it's our Grants and Contributions Transformation Initiative. We have actually brought in Canadian partners to help with the redesign, so we are actually co-designing and working together to figure out ways that we can thin out all of those processes you're mentioning. With respect to the question of bottom heavy, top heavy, under the Transformation Initiative, there is a commitment to kind of rationalize the senior executive ranks at Global Affairs Canada. It's an ongoing process. As you know, it's a very large department in terms of the number of executives that are there. And we're in year one, basically, maybe at the end of year one of it. So we're
timeline for completion?
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years. Would you expect that the resulting grants and contribution agreements, or let me rephrase, that more funds would then flow potentially through our NGOs and Canadian-based civil society organizations as opposed to multilateral? That's another criticism that I hear, that it's easier right now to flow funds through multilateral organizations because the levels of accountability aren't, there's some of that accountability is transferred to the other organization as opposed to be homegrown. We all want taxpayer money to be appropriately spent and reviewed, but it's got to be done faster and better. Comments?
Yeah. So maybe two thoughts on that. So there is a commitment to use Canadian organizations more. And the amounts going to Canadian organizations have stayed roughly in the $1 billion range over a number of years. The challenge has been the world changes and the needs, for example, that we have to respond to very quickly dictate what tools are best available. So, for example, Canada's support to Ukraine, which has been massive over the last 2 years, has required using like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So there are times when it's difficult to use Canadian organizations depending upon what the challenge is. But we are working to find ways to better leverage Canadian organizations.
Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit. Sure. As you're aware, this committee is undertaking a study of Africa,
yes,
and our response at many levels to it. In assessing projects under the international development framework, to what extent is the lens of trade used? I know there's other lenses, whatever the plural form is, that go to evaluating projects. To what extent is the benefit of trade, both to the host and the donor country, donor in this case being Canada, considered?
In general, I mean, it depends on the context that we're working within. So a good portion of the development assistance programming that we undertake is dedicated to specific sectors of development. So, for example, global health, sexual reproductive health and rights. There are less opportunities to make that link to trade and improving trade. But we also do a significant amount of work in the economic development sphere. And there are more direct relationships to trade. As part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, there is a dedicated effort to find ways to better use our development assistance to respond to the needs of developing countries in the Indo-Pacific area that would facilitate trade for them, but also obviously directly with Canada. And I would say it's the same opportunities in Africa that are possible.
More specific question, why was $5 million from the DFAD budget transferred over to the Department of the Environment for the Africa Food Accelerator? I'm not quite following that one.
That's a good question. Oh, you can take. Okay, well, I'm surprised.
Thank you. So this is funding as part of our overall $5.3 billion climate finance initiative, and so most of the money flows via Global Affairs, but we also accept project proposals from departments. So in this case, it was Environment Canada, which is working with a platform to support adaptation activities on food security in Africa.
So that was a project initiated.
You're out of time, Mr. Epp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We next go to MP Chattel. You have 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to share my time with my colleague. The question I'd like to pursue has to do with the investments of Canada in support to developing countries to fight against climate change and the impacts that are strongly felt by vulnerable populations. I know that we've promised $450 million in the Green Fund for Climate. This is a UN fund in the following the COP meetings and the Paris Accord. Have these funds been sent, and if so, what is their impact? And also, what about the funds that we send to different organizations? Do you assess the impact that these funds have when they are sent to international organizations? Yes, absolutely. The impact is the goal of all these investments. One thing that is different is that oftentimes we talk about loans when we're talking about certain types of funding, and these are over longer terms, can be a 15 or 20-year term. So the impacts will be over a 20-year period. This being said, we have key indicators such as the number of tons of greenhouse gas emissions that were reduced, how many cars have been withdrawn from the road, and these types of things for each of the funds. Thank you. I'll give the floor to my colleague now.
Much, Mr. Chair, Deputy and officials, thank you very much for being here today. I want to build on what Mr. Epp has asked. I come across different charitable organizations who raise money, do a lot of what appears to me excellent work abroad, but they've never, for an organization that has never been granted any program or projects, they find it, at least they tell me, they find it really difficult to be first-time applicant. So, what is your advice to them on how they should go about demonstrating the work and trying to have the best application put forward?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's a very good, it's a very good question. And it's been a challenge for a very long time. As was mentioned, the rules with respect to offering assistance, offering a grant or a contribution arrangement with an organization, are sometimes quite detailed, and requires a knowledge of the situation on the ground. We expect to get results from these projects, obviously. The challenge often with a number of small and medium-sized organizations is that they have small footprints globally, and that requires us to help them with both their concept notes, for example, to how to better write the proposals that they're making, and to work with them. And for that reason, we did a dedicated call for small and medium-sized organizations, so that they were actually targeted for the purposes of opening up a chance for new organizations to take part in Canadian assistance.
And so, when did that happen, and how successful has it been?
So, as I mentioned in earlier, there's a number of firms that have, a number of organizations that have already received funding and are just ongoing. We have a large number of other ones that have gone through the process and have been kind of approved in terms of the quality of the proposal, and so that it's ongoing. But I can get you the specifics with respect to the specifics of that call.
And when DAC is examining applications, does it also look at the organization's ability to deliver work in globally, or because there are some organizations that tend to specialize in certain parts of the world, and does that work against them if they're regionally focused?
I wouldn't say that works against them if they're regionally focused. I mean, Global Affairs Canada has funding in all corners of the world. We have programs in the Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, Maghreb and Middle East, and in the Indo-Pacific. So there's lots of opportunity around the globe. For certain, the government has made a commitment to acting upon a number of really important sectors: global health, sexual reproductive health and rights, climate change, food security. And so a predominant amount of our global development assistance spending is in those areas, which means that, organizations that align with those priorities, obviously there's greater opportunities in that respect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Abra. So next we go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, and thank you for the witnesses to have stayed and continue to answer our questions. As when you'll see the minister, you can tell him goodbye on my behalf, because he left so quickly. I didn't have the opportunity to do that. So this is an exercise. Well, it's very good for parliamentarians. It's almost a Where's Waldo exercise, is to find the total of the amounts for public aid, for development aid by the Government of Canada. So are you able to provide to us the total amount, not while taking into account the previous years, next years, but annually speaking, how much do we invest in public aid to development? And what is the percentage of our GDP is this? I'm going to find the amount. We do have the figures here. One moment. As you know, Canada uses the fiscal year. The OECD uses the calendar year. So the figures that have just been published for 2023 demonstrate that Canada 0.38% of the GDP, so 10.9%. 10.9. What is it? 10.9 billion. $10.9 billion in 2023. Okay. And so you recognize that is less than 0.7%. So with the reduction last year, how are we going to provide indications showing that we're trying to reach 0.7%? Well, the government has not committed to reaching 0.7%. Right now, there's no specific plan for that. However, the government did commit to continue to increase the envelope each year. And since 2016, the amount has been on the rise. Not last year, up until 2023. So I'm coming back now to the question of Haiti because I understand that we don't necessarily have the figures here as to what has been spent up until now. However, there was an element in my question. I only had 2.5 minutes, so I didn't have the time earlier on. There was an element of my question which was, why didn't we increase our contribution given what's happening in Haiti right now? This is a more political question, but are you able to give me an administrative answer to this question as to why we didn't increase the funding given what's happening in Haiti? To not increase? Well, what I can tell you is that since 2022, Canada has sent $380 million. So this is a significant amount. And this also includes international aid for development and support for the mission that have been approved by the United Nations with regards to security. So, in my opinion, it was increased. I was speaking earlier of $28.3 million that were announced in 2023-2024. This was the answer of Canada to the crisis, and now you're talking about $380 million? So I'm not sure I'm following you. Since April the 1st, 2022. Since April 1st, 2022. So where's Waldo? I mean, in the same spirit, we announced a fund, supplementary fund, $350 million over 2 years as of 2024-2025 to increase the capacity of Canada to react faced with large-scale crises and the deterioration of humanitarian and the increase of humanitarian crises throughout the world. So how much was spent up until now on this $350 million announced over a 2-year period? And given the multiple crises, why was this not increased further? The $350 million was just announced in the 2024 budget, so this would be for the House of Commons to approve it. None of this has been spent yet. So this is the reaction to this budget. Was there a sum in the previous budget allocated to increase the capacity of Canada to react to large-scale crises and humanitarian crises throughout the world? Yes, but more specifically for very specific crises. For example, Peter, I'm not sure if you have a certain specific last year? It was a crisis pool. So within the budgetary envelope for international aid, there's $200 million that is set aside every year, and it's there in order to provide aid during special events, special humanitarian crises. As an example, in 2022-23, Canada spent $1.3 billion in humanitarian aid. Our budget at Global Affairs for humanitarian assistance, $609 million a year. So These were additional sums that were added, and the 350 million, this is added to the 200 million. The 350 million will be added in our program for humanitarian assistance. So we have a program for humanitarian assistance, 609 million a year. And we could sometimes get funding from, we have what we call a crisis pool, and we're able to obtain some funds during a crisis. But the 350 million, this will be part of our program within Global Affairs.
Over. For the last question, we go to MP McPherson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for remaining today and answering our questions. It's useful. I'm just going to very quickly comment on a question that my colleague, Mr. Bergeron, asked with regards to ODA. Being at 0.38% is about half of what we have committed to. I was a little bit shocked to hear the officials mention that we have not committed to 0.7%. I think we all know that it was, in fact, Prime Minister Pearson who actually put that 0.7% benchmark in place. Many of our allies meet that and exceed that amount. And so to hear the minister talk about the importance of international development while continuing to underfund international development from Canada is worrying, and is something that is particularly worrying when we see that the Conservative leader has said that if he was to make government, he would cut foreign international development spending. This is not Canada being back on the world stage. This is not where we should be at. We should be much more ambitious in our goals with regards to international development. The questions I have to start with today, I guess, first of all, I'd like to request, could you please share with the committee in writing the legal evaluations your department has conducted over the war in Gaza, including legal advice you've received regarding the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice and arms sales, please. That's the first request I have for you. The second one is with regards to humanitarian access. So right now we know there is incredible conflicts happening in Sudan, in Haiti, in the DRC, Ethiopia, of course, in Gaza and Ukraine. We want to understand, or I'd like to understand, what your government is doing to better ensure humanitarian access to some of these very, very challenging places to work. And in particular, what is the government doing to ensure the safety of humanitarian workers in these places?
Well, the Government of Canada has used every platform available to us to call for access in humanitarian access and respect for humanitarian law. Every possible opportunity we have done that. We work through our partners such as the International Commission, International Commission of the Red Cross. We work through the United Nations. What we can do is work through the system that's been put in place to respond, and when possible, use our sometimes the privileged chairs that we get to sit in to make these demands. So, as an example, very recently, the minister took part in an international conference in Paris on Sudan. And that was, as you've noted, one of the key things that everybody noted. Like, really what was required was a peaceful resolution of the conflict, but in the interim, that access and the funding of the appeals that the United Nations have made for Sudan was what was most needed.
Thank you. And I would just press the government to continue to do this important work, because, of course, the challenge is you will have to be nimble. You will have to be able to work with non-traditional partners to be able to provide the urgently needed humanitarian access in many of these conflicts. And I think, honestly, we don't have some of those relationships right now, and the government needs to be able to do that work much, much better. I also wanted to ask, with the expected end of the Middle East strategy, is there a new Middle East strategy in development to respond to the changing situations that we see in the region? So we know that the original strategy was a response to the Syrian crisis and to other crises in the area. This all looks very different now, and the needs are massive, and the crises continue to build and to grow. Is there consideration of a broader strategy that would encompass the changes we're seeing, including in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and other countries, knowing that the current strategy ends in 2025?
That's right. So thanks very much for the question. That is a part of this year's main estimates, as you note. As you noted, the previous Middle East strategy, which had been in place since 2016, was built very much on a different problem set and on a different platform. The decision was made that it was time actually to ramp down that strategy. Of course, since October 7th, everything has changed again in the Middle East. We are still, hopefully, as everybody has noted, everybody hopes for a ceasefire as soon as possible. And I think at that point, when we see like what the situation, but whether it be the political situation on the ground, the humanitarian assistance situation on the ground, the development needs of the region, and finally, as you've noted in previous questions, the reconstruction needs in Gaza, that it will require the Government of Canada, obviously, to reflect and review our current footprint in the region, and to come forward with, we'll be coming forward with advice to government when it's appropriate.
Okay, and my final question I have for you is with regards to sanctions. So we know that in December, we sent a letter asking that there be sanctions on extremist settlers in the West Bank. This was violence that was supported by extremist ministers in the Israeli government. We asked in February. It's now May, 5 months after we asked for these. Why is it taking the government so long when other countries have already figured out how to put those sanctions in place? Is the delay from your perspective political or administrative?
Very briefly, please.
I think what I'll have to do is pass it to my colleague Alexandre, as I'm not actually an expert on sanctions.
Thank you. Under 30 seconds.
I'll be very brief, Mr. Chair. All I can say is that all these options continue to be on the table, are considered actively by the government. The advice continues to be provided by officials. So I wouldn't say to the point of the honourable member that it's due to any deliberate delays. All of these are under active consideration currently.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levesque. We even had 5 seconds to spare. Very grateful. So at this point, I would like to thank all of you. It's almost been 2 hours. We're going to be going into committee business. So thank you very, very much, Mr. McClellan, Ms. Urban, Ms. Carruthers, Mr. Levesque, and Mr. McDougall. Very grateful for your time and for your insights. The meeting, we're just going to suspend for a couple of minutes because we have 2 members who are joining us virtually for committee business.
Thank you.